It's another episode of the Christian Reeve Podcast. But before we get into it, are you subscribed? If not, please make sure to subscribe, like and share the video and spread the word. Because the Christian Reeve Podcast is here to stay. I love doing this and I love all of you that support me. So thank you. And yeah, let's get into this podcast, shall we? Boom! Hello and welcome to another episode of the Christian Reeve Podcast. Today's guest is a professional musician. Let's say that again. Professional musician all the way from Philadelphia. His name is Adams Eberwein, but he goes by the professional name Adams Wilson. That's the name of his band. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. And I should say it's Adams with an S. So it's a little weird.
Yeah. So I was looking into this and I was like, why has he done that? And then I realized there is actually a professional musician. I haven't heard of this, but a professional musician called Adam Wilson. And it was funny because when I was looking up your stuff, I remember seeing like a couple of shows that you'd played, right? And there was like someone had put like, you know, the classic chalkboard thing where they've written the names and someone's written Adam Wilson. And I just knew that it was someone like, oh, they must have just had a spelling mistake in their name. I'll fix that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's on album covers, it's on T-shirts or whatever, and it's in my email. And so whenever I was going back and forth with like, club promoters or managers, whatever, it's amazing how often people would correct me on that. And it's like, I blame my mom. She thought that it would be hilarious to name me. She thought we were related to John Adams, the American president.
Oh, I understand. So your legal name is actually Adams Eberwein, and then that's why you've chosen. Okay.
Right. Yeah. So I always thought people would be. My last name is Eberwein, and first of all, you pronounced it correctly, which is unheard of. Almost everybody gets it incorrect. They say like Eberwein or and so that's the name I thought would be tricky. So Wilson is my middle name, one of two middle names, and so I was like, that sounds like a last name. I'm going to do that to stop confusing people. And instead, the Adams trips people up more often than the Eberwein did. It makes no sense to me.
I think it's kind of cool though. It makes you unique, It's something different. I mean, I get the same thing. Sorry, go on, please.
Oh no, I've only met one other. Well, I haven't met him. I found a person on the internet named Adams. I've only seen that one name in my entire time on this earth. So it's definitely unique. I haven't run into anybody in person that's got it.
I remember a feeling of sorrow when I started realizing around the world that people started popping up with the name Christian Reeve, because for so long it was this unique name. And but I have the same thing with my surname, where everyone assumes, oh, you mean Christopher Reeves, it's Reeves. And it's like, no, I know my surname, thank you very much. That it is what it is.
Yeah.
But since we're on the topic of your band, I find this very interesting because you've worked with a lot of different musicians with every single record that you've produced. And as I understand, it's like different iterations. So like with every change within the band, that reflects in the sound. So like for 2 or 3 years you'll be recording with a particular group of people and then you move on to the next thing. And I wondered, how does this actually impact the songwriting and gigging process for you? Like, what are the major challenges with that?
I mean, for me, it's keeping a band. So, well, let me back up. Like I started out as like just a church musician, right?
Okay.
Like that's all I wanted to do. I've since become a non-believer, but we're going back like 20 years. And so I knew I was in a church that they played a lot of they had a lot of musicians who were like actual gigging musicians who played at clubs and bars and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, interesting.
On Sunday they would come in and they were these amazing musicians who were playing very, very basic music in the church. And they were always like, jazzing it up and making it sound amazing. And I was inspired by that, and I kind of was just like, I want to learn from these guys or whatever. So I started writing my own music. And then I was like playing solo acoustic gigs at like coffee houses and things like that. And then I made an album and, I got 1 or 2 people to help out, but I asked them if they wanted to be in a band. They weren't available. So it just like then went to make another album and in a real studio. And I needed like actual musicians, because I was like, I'm paying all this money. I'm not going to walk in there with my lack of musical skill. I wanted people who could really like bring up the, the level of skill. So I hired people, and I asked, so I was like always asking for like 2 or 3 years. I was going around literally everyone I meet. I'm like, do you play music? Do you want to be in my band? Like, I just felt like a salesman trying to push people into my band. And it like, I realized like that became a full-time job almost, of like trying to keep the band staffed. So it was like, part of it is really, really challenging, because you're trying to find people that you work with well, that bring something to the music. But, you're also trying to find people that are reliable. And that takes up so much of your time, because so many musicians are not reliable. That's like part of musician DNA, is not showing up on time or not doing the work.
That shit drives me nuts, man. Like, seriously, you're giving me PTSD right now.
Yeah. And so it's like, I mean, it's always that push and pull, because that's like the downside, right? Is like trying to keep the band staffed is tricky. But the upside is, musicians love playing with new toys. And when a new musician comes into the band, it's a new shot to your system of like, yeah, like it's totally different. It's like getting a new instrument. You're totally infused with new creative energy, because now this person is like, oh, you wanted to do that with, this song, you could do this, that, or the other thing. They're bringing new ideas, and they're bringing new, like, just new energy, I guess is the best way to put it. And it's so like, there's always that like honeymoon period where like a new batch of songs comes out of nowhere because a new person was brought into the fold. So there's upsides to going through a bunch of staff.
But see, the thing is with your band that's unique is that like every single lineup change, it's like completely different people. Because like I would understand if you would have like, a band and then people would drop in and drop out throughout the years. But with yours, okay, like for instance, if we go to like 2015, 2016, you had like a set band there, and then we moved like sort of 2-3 years down the line and it's completely different people. And the only sort of fixed constant is yourself. And I find this really interesting in the sense that, like, obviously you're leading this whole thing. Like you said, behind the scenes, you're kind of like trying to like spend all the time trying to just get this together. So I get that. And I've been there myself as well. So I know how that is. But I guess the thing that's really interesting to me is like, what's the dynamic like with writing the songs? Like, since that like you're never going to leave the band, like it's your band, it's your baby. How do you approach that? Like, because if like, hey, there's probably a limit on this. Maybe they'll be in the band a year. Maybe there'll be a couple of years. There's a fixed time on this. So do you kind of like sit down, you write the songs, and then you invite everyone in to chip in? Or do you sit down and jam with these people and really include them in? Like, what does that process actually look like every time?
It's different every time. So for the album that I'm about to release, the process was I guess I should back up again. It's always hard to know where to start because the band's been going for so long, right? But like for the longest stint I had was with a guy that I met off of Craigslist. His name was Matt Riley. Yeah. And we had a live gigging band for, I guess, like 10 years, 8 or 9 years.
Damn.
So almost 10. And he and I were the only constants, and like other people would come in and out. But then I had a son in 2015, and a couple of other life circumstances kind of prevented me from playing live anymore. I just didn't, and I wasn't enjoying it. Like I realized, the challenge of like getting into clubs and like promoting it and all that stuff stopped being enjoyable for me. And I realized, when you have a baby, like it's a very it sharpens your awareness of like what needs to stay in your life and what needs to go. So I just like, I had to make some cuts to my schedule, and I was like, well, the band is consuming like 75% of my time. So I'm going to stop playing live, and I'm just going to record, record. And so the band, I ended that, and they went on, the band that I was with at that time went on to become another band, and they've since broken up because bands are unreliable and That's just the way things work. But then I called up a couple of people who had been in the band in other forms at one point, and I was like, let's just get together and jam, and like, no pressure. We're not going to play it live. We're not going to worry about what it sounds like. We're just going to play music. And so we spent probably like a year and a half just playing in our, my buddy Ryan's basement. And, so half of the songs came from that, and half of the songs came from like after COVID hit. I was writing stuff by myself because we couldn't jam anymore. So it's like this most recent album, we're calling it Parasite and Host. It's like half of jams and half of me sitting in my studio writing by myself.
What do you find is a better process in terms of writing songs? Because like I've changed my songwriting process over the years. It used to be that, I'd have the lyrics ready, I'd sit down and I'd try to kind of jam with people and like make the lyrics work around it, right? And that jamming element is still true. Obviously I'm solo songwriter now, so it's a little bit different, but I've noticed my process has changed now where I pretty much will just sit down and I'll be like, I feel like writing a song, and then I start jamming and like sort of seeing how it makes me feel. And then I start writing, and I basically do both things at the same time, like the lyrics and the music, which I don't think that's the most effective way to do it. There's better ways to do it, but I don't know. That's just my style right now. But like, what do you think is the best style, or what do you prefer doing when you're songwriting?
I think the biggest thing for me is I love having the crutch of having someone else there to bounce the ideas off of, because I'm really insecure about my songwriting.
Okay.
And I love when there's someone there who has a better grasp on theory or, the mechanics to say like, is this good? And I'll play something and I'll be like, I mean, that's terrible, right? Like, you're kind of just like,
okay, yeah.
Seeking approval from that second party. I think that brings better stuff out of me. Okay. And like, it's probably not healthy mentally or emotionally to do it that way, but it's like, it's so much more productive because like, it gives me that confidence when someone else says like, oh no, hey, what are you doing there? That's good. Like to be able to build a song faster. And then, two, when you have two minds working on it, two or more, those people go away sometimes and they'll come back with like, oh, I figured out that bridge. And it sounds twice as good as what I would have thought of, or it's like, putting new ingredients into the recipe that, I tend to get very, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, I fall into a routine where I just do the same thing over and over again. And I think like having a second party, a second person gives you an extra element that helps you change it up a little bit. But I'll say this, like, I don't have a specific formula for songwriting. I've been doing it for over 20 years. And, some songs, and if you talk to any creative person, I think you'll hear something similar. Like there's been times when I was driving home from band practice and I wrote 3 songs on the way.
Yeah.
Right. It's coming, like the muse is there and it's just like in your brain. Almost as if it's being downloaded from the ether, right? I'm not like a spiritual person, but it feels like weird and supernatural where just like songs appear. And then there's other times where I've spent like 2 weeks in front of the computer with a guitar and like, I got a notepad or whatever, and just it's shit and nothing is coming. And you're just like, everything is frustrating. And you're like, there's only 7 basic chords and I'm just like, I've used up my palette, it's gone, and it's like a slog, but even stuff still comes out of that. Like you still sometimes can manage to get a song and it's like, it took you 6 months to craft, but the process didn't feel as good, but the result is still just as effective. And sometimes those songs do as well as the ones that came supernaturally.
I completely agree with you. That's exactly how I see it as well. I remember when I was in my very first band, not very first, it was like my first proper band where we went gigging, blah, 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 I must have been about, I think I was 17, 18 when the band started. When it ended, I was 21. So we went for about 3 years and we wrote together. So I would always write the lyrics. And I had a heavy hand in the riffs, but like I kind of let the rest of the band, like same as you, like come together, jam. I always felt that was the best way to write music, and I still to this day, it's a bit different, obviously, doing solo stuff, but I still think nothing quite beats that feeling when you're like, yeah, we got something here. What's this?
Yeah.
You know, just that feeling is amazing. But yeah, I had a similar thing, but what happened to me was that band ended, and then I had a couple of bands after that, and then I started doing solo stuff. But my solo stuff when I first started was trash. It was terrible. It did kind of, I mean, in my opinion, I don't know, like
Yeah.
there's still some stuff there. There's like a 2013 EP that I did that's like the last time I did something in a studio properly. And yeah, I think it was okay, but it felt like what you said, it was very forced. It didn't really feel like, you know, I was inspired and something came. It was like, okay, this was the best that I could do at that time. And I was still, I think, a very novice songwriter at that point. You know, I was learning to write music on my own, which is very tough. But then years later, I had something like what you explained, this kind of supernatural feeling. And it actually started with my poetry, because that's something I just have always done on the side, where it sort of sprung out of songwriting, where I go, well, this isn't quite a song. Maybe this is a poem. And then that's, yeah. But I remember that I stopped trying, if that makes sense. Like I stopped trying to sit down and go, I'm going to do this. And I just thought, I'm just going to wait until an idea comes to me. And ever since I made that decision, personally, I feel like I've made the best stuff I've ever made. And I use that same approach with everything, like music, poetry, YouTube content, whatever the case may be. An idea comes and I'm like, okay, let's make it into something. And I got to say, I always feel like, especially with music, that's the best way to write, because it will come from like a feeling or like a 2 a.m. thought, and you're like, oh shit, and you got to get the pad and all phone notes or whatever, you know. And yeah, maybe it's supernatural, maybe it really does feel that way, because it feels like almost in a way, like I feel like us creatives are like, yeah, people say, oh, you're amazing, you're this, you're that. I don't even feel that way. I feel like we're more kind of like messengers. Like the messages come from like some other reality, and we're just voicing it, you know, in a kind of crazy way.
But I think like you hit on something that I think, you know, for a while I was writing like a music blog about, you know, about songwriting and, you know, performance and that kind of thing. And I think if I had to like, when I was working on that, it kind of forced me to like think about the process, where I think before I just was in the process and I wasn't really stopping to think about like, what is the alchemy here? But like when I was writing the blog, it occurred to me that like a couple of times people have come to me and said like, you know, you're prolific, like what's your secret to like keep writing more stuff? And my thing is just, I think it's input, right? Like if you are just a songwriter and that's all you do, at some point I think the well starts to dry up a little bit and you get desperate and you make bad decisions. But if you're a poet and you're a songwriter and you're a, you know, a visual artist, you're a photographer, a filmmaker, whatever, you're an avid reader, you know, you're a consumer of things, like it's a lot, the well stays wet a lot longer because it's always like new things coming in, you become hungry for more things and therefore you create more things because like there's more stuff going around in the blender. I'm like, there's like 5 different metaphors going on right now. But, you know, it just like, when people say to me like, you know, I'm out of ideas or whatever, like I'm having a writer's block or I'm having a dry spell, it's like, you need to go try something new, like throw a new wrench into it, like go on a trip to a place that you would not normally go. Like don't go to Disney World, which I love, you know, I love Disney World, whatever, don't get me wrong, but like go, you know, go camping in the desert or something like that. Go, you know, go on a date that you wouldn't normally go on. Read a book that's totally out of your experience. You know, like one of the most like prolific moments I had was after I read Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card, like this is probably 12 or 13 years ago. You know, it's like, it's such a random book. Like, I think it's like even a young adult, like it's not even meant for grown-ups, but I just like, somebody had recommended it to me and I just was like completely inspired by that. And like all of my songs, just a whole bunch of new songs just started flowing out, where it had started to slow down before that. And I just thought, like, this one book had such an impact on me, right? Like, so many songs came out of just reading this reading experience. And I just think that's the thing, is like, if you're just one person, if you're just a filmmaker and that's all you do is make films, at some point you're going to get stale, right? And you're going to be very boring to talk to. But if you are something who has a hand in a bunch of different stuff, it's a lot easier to stay energized.
I couldn't agree more with you. Yeah, it's one of the things I've decided to do with my life is to try as many different things as possible. Like, if an opportunity comes, I welcome it, because it gives you more to talk about, and if nothing else, humans, we're storytellers. That's what music is. It's a story. This is how I felt about this thing, or this is a dream I had, or this is my interpretation of this art, whatever. It comes from many different places. I mean, fucking hell, I wrote a song the other day that started as like a feeling about like an ex-girlfriend, and then it turned into like a Western song, where I turned it into this like legend of this woman who like is a badass gunslinger. Like, do you know what I mean? That shit just comes, it grows. But no, I totally agree with you. This reminds me of two random things, but I'll draw them all together. So firstly, I think you just need to kind of go out there and do as much as you can. Like you said, go out in the desert, go on a trip, go here, try a different line of work, do this thing that you feel uncomfortable about. Like, especially doing things to bring yourself out of the comfort zone, I think is very important, because naturally, anyone that gets writer's block is just doing the same thing. Like, you can't keep doing the same thing and expect different results. That's literally insanity. And it reminds me of two things. It reminds me of this. What I was listening to, like a Charles Bukowski audio recording one time, and he was talking about how, like, when people get famous, like writers get famous, when they first begin, they're really interesting because their life hasn't been changed by writing. They're still, tirelessly writing, trying to get big. And then once they get big, here they are hanging out at like cocktail parties and hanging around with other literary people. And, but they're young. They're like 21, 22. They haven't lived. They haven't done anything. What have they got to write about? Like, oh, yes, I'm at these cocktail parties and this is where I'm at. And it's like, that's not relatable. If nothing else, like, writing, poetry, music needs to be relatable, because that's how people can relate to it. Like, it doesn't have to necessarily be about the lyrics, but the lyrics, I would say, are a really big thing that draw you in and make you more relatable. And pushing that even further, it also reminds me of Eminem, the musician. Like, when he first started writing music, it was basically him just telling his life story. Like, hey, I grew up in Detroit and life fucking sucks, and this is what it's like. And, that's why people, really related to him, because he was just being real. He was just being honest and saying it how it was. And people were like, yeah, I feel that way. Then he became famous and successful. And okay, this is a bit controversial, but I'm going to say it. I don't think his music is good anymore. Because I feel like he just doesn't really have much to say, and that's not a knock on him. I still think he's a great songwriter, but if you were to compare a song he's written now versus a song he wrote, in the early 2000s, there just isn't any comparison. And I feel like it's because he isn't doing much. Like you say, he is just a musician, and that's what it. He needs to go off on a trek to the desert. I don't know, but I mean, if you look at bands like the Beatles, they did that. They went into like India and various other places. I mean, okay, they were experimenting with a lot of drugs, so that does change things. But the point is, they went and learned a bunch of stuff. Went out into the world, learned different ways of life, learned new instruments, and that shaped all of that music moving forward and expanded their career even more, because they couldn't have just kept doing, their 50s era music, because people would have got bored eventually, and yes, they could have got bored of the Beatles. The Beatles are amazing, but if they'd have kept doing the same thing forever, you know what I mean? And that's why I find it funny when people are like, oh, why do musicians have to change? I like their old stuff. And it's like, if you just keep doing the same thing, people will get bored. End of it.
Yeah, you begin to eat your own tail. I agree with you 100%. It's like, you know, when you, it's sort of like the blessing and the curse of being a non famous musician, right? Is like, you know, I've been knocking away at this thing since you know, the early 2000s, and like it's always been a part-time gig. And you know, there's been good moments where, you know, I got invited to play my original music at people's weddings, and like,
Oh, wow.
you know, got a song in a Netflix movie, or, you know, got on a couple of different shows or whatever. But it's like, you know, I've always had that fantasy of like, if this could be my full-time gig, that would be amazing. But knowing in the back of my mind that as soon as that happens, like, then you're just bound to write, you know, about that experience, because that's all you do, right? Like, it's only a matter of time before you start writing songs about the road. And you know, it's just, I feel like there is a blessing in not having it be, the struggle continues, and then the struggle produces better songs, because the struggle continues. If the struggle's no longer there, then you just sound like, I don't know, Weezer writing Beverly Hills, right? Where it's just like talking about how awesome you are all the time, which, no complaints, I love that song. But you know, there's only so much you can get out of that. So yeah, I'm sort of grateful, I guess, as a songwriter, that I've never hit it big, because you know, it keeps the music coming.
It's funny you say that as well, because for me, I used to be obsessed with becoming famous and successful. I was like, yeah, that's all I want, blah, blah, blah. And now, I mean, sure, that'd be great, but to be honest, I just want to be able to do this as my job. I don't even care really about becoming really, really well known anymore. For me, if I can just do this, I'm happy with that, because it makes me happy, and this beats doing a 9-to-5 job, which is what I hate. You know, so yeah, I agree with you on that. And I said this funnily enough, in a recent podcast with another guest. Like, I think it's better if you become famous later in life. Like, you need to live a life in order to have something to talk about. You know what I mean? Like, it's the struggles that people really relate to. Like you say, who can relate to being rich and living successfully in Beverly Hills?
Right.
It's like,
which I think is hilarious.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to. You know, like Bruce Springsteen is a great example, right? Dude's been a millionaire for 99% of his career, yet he's still writing about the struggles of the working class, and people eat it up. And I'm like, I don't, where is that coming from? You know, and I think he even said recently that like all of his songs are based on mostly his dad's life, because his life has been one of privilege. But I also think I'm going through this, you know, last year or two, I've been thinking about this a lot, which is that, you know, fame, is it really that great? Like, I haven't had it, so I'm not sure. But I went through a small period where, you know, when I was playing in church, it was a large church, right? It was about 1,000 people in and out over time. They weren't all in the building at the same time, but it was like 1,000 people in the community. And, you know, I'm up on stage, and people began to form like attachments with me, even though I'd never met them. And so like, I'd be walking through, you know, the church, and someone would come up to me like, "Hey, Adams, like, you know, the other day," and they would just go on about their life story, you know, whatever it was that was important to them. And I was like, "I'm sorry, I'm Adams. How are you?" Like, I've never met this person. And they had built this connection with me that in their head was very real. And like, you know, that's like such a small example of like, when you think about, you know, being famous, people are doing that to you on a much larger scale, right? They think they know about you because you're writing these really personal songs.
Yeah.
You know, confessional things, and talking about the dark moments of your life. And so people, you know, relate to that, and they form this subconscious connection with you where they feel like they know you. And, you know, that's weird. Like, it's weird to interact with people when they feel that way. But second of all, the other big thing that I keep thinking about is like all of my heroes, a bunch of my heroes have, you know, died over the past number of years, right? Like Chris Cornell, Scott Weiland, Tom Petty, I'm missing a few, but like, these people were not happy, right? They were at the peak of their game, and they were miserable. They were not thrilled about being the most famous musicians on the planet. And so like I keep trying to remind myself, like, you know, Jim Carrey said that he wished everybody could be rich and famous so they could experience that it's not all it's cracked up to be. And that has really stuck with me over the past couple of years. It's like, maybe getting everything you want isn't really what you want. And like, sometimes like imagining it is more enjoyable than actually getting it. And it's like, that sounds like sour grapes, I think, a little bit. People are like, you only think that because you're not famous, right? It's like, sure, I would like to make money from my art that would pay my bills and all that stuff. But I also have to recognize that people at the mountaintop have said it's not that great up here.
Yeah, and that's the thing as well. Like, there's a couple of things here. One, being famous is not what it was. You know, like anyone can become famous these days. So what you become famous for is key. You know, are you just well known for, like, I don't know, being on a reality show, or are you famous because people respect your work and revere you and stuff? Because look, everyone loves to receive a compliment, right? Everyone loves to be showered with attention, but you know, there are some people who need it, who crave it for their ego, and then there are other people that are like, meh, whatever, right? I think for me, growing up, I really wanted it because I had self-esteem issues, and I was really, you know, I felt like crap about myself, and I thought, oh, if I become famous, you know, maybe that's the key. You know, everyone will love me and I'll feel good about myself. But that just doesn't work. You need to learn to love yourself first and foremost. And it doesn't really matter what people think, you know, it matters what you think.
Yeah.
But
I've recognized that recently in myself, that, you know, it shouldn't have taken this long to discover it, that, you know, my creativity is largely driven by trying to get other people to love me. Like, you know, I don't have that love for myself that I should have. And a large piece of me making shit is because I want people to say, oh my God, this is great and you're great. But then the crazy part about it is that even when someone says, I love this, I'm like, no, you don't. Like, you know, I like push it away. Yeah. Right? Like, there's this weird thing that our brains do, or at least my brain does, where it's like, you want people to connect to you with your art, but then when they do, you're like, you know, it feels weird to accept it. So, you know, you kind of push it away and pretend like it's not a thing. But yeah, it's musicians aren't known for being healthy, right? Like, creative types are not, I think, generally speaking.
Who was it that's, maybe it was Morrissey that said it, like, you know, he liked being like a sort of a tortured soul. And I think like a lot of creatives, yeah, we are tortured souls. You know what I mean? It's like my life hasn't even been that difficult, but I can think of like low moments, dark things, you know, things that have happened to friends. And that realistically is where the good stuff comes from, you know, because it's like, we're as humans, we gravitate towards darkness, towards tough things. Yeah, that's why we love things like serial killer documentaries and stuff. It's like, it's fucked up, but it's the fascination with that. You know, if everything's happy and go lucky and stuff, like, that's not really not a lot of people can really relate to that, unfortunately. It's great to feel happy and want to party and dance and be happy in the moment, but like, a lot of us are dealing with struggles that you just don't see. And I think that when you listen to certain music that can make you feel how you're feeling right now, or you feel like, oh, I can relate to this. This is exactly how I feel. That's probably where that personal connection you were talking about comes from. It's like, this person gets my struggle. And it's like, well, it's not a unique struggle, you know.
I think that, you know, we had a band, you know, when I had the live band going a bunch of years ago, you know, we were talking about things along this line, and my drummer Bob asked me, like, he's like, who hurt you? You know, because we were working on a new song, and it was, you know, I don't know how to write happy songs. I never have.
Yeah.
You know, in my teen years, like when I first started working on songwriting, my mom was like, why don't you write anything happy? And I was like, what? Like, I'm not happy, so I don't know how to do that. And like, that has been the theme that has run through my music for the entire time I've been working on it. So my drummer says like, who hurt you? Why is everything so miserable? And, you know, the guy that I had been in the band with the longest, Matt, was like, Adams's tortured soul is our wellspring. Like, that's the only reason why we have new songs all the time, is because like, if he wasn't miserable, you know, there'd be nothing to write. I mean, and that's the reality of it, right? It's like, you know, there's only so many songs that you can write about, like, you know, I can't even think of any, right? I just was listening to this new album by Royal Teeth, and they have one that's like, you know, we're gonna make it happen or something, and it's all just like positive, like reinforcement, you know, statements. And it was just like, I could never write this song. Not in a million years could I write the song. it has to be, I just had a huge breakup, or, you know, something in my life went wrong, somebody died. Like, that's the only thing I know how to connect to.
There's these two songs that I've been listening to a lot recently, that are really like happy-go-lucky, positive vibes. But when you listen to the lyrics, they're actually really depressing. And I realized something dawned on me recently, that a lot of the music I love, even like, because I'm obviously drawn towards miserable music, you know, I love me a bit of Smiths and Radiohead, and, you know, go on, right? And it makes me laugh, because I'm like, oh, I'm just, you know, I am exactly what I hate, that kind of type of person that's like a muse sitting there like going, woe is me. And it's like, I'm not that guy, but I love that. And that's totally how I write, and that's totally what I'm into. But I'm not a miserable guy, but I sometimes feel like that. And I don't know, it's that constant not understanding anything kind of. But it's I don't know, I suppose it's good as a creative. But yeah, there's this song recently by this British pop artist called KSI. He's a YouTuber who's now got into music, right? And he released a song called Lighter. And the song's like really, you know, happy-go-lucky dance vibes, perfect summer tune, right? But the lyrics are about like basically getting over a breakup and literally feeling lighter, more positive as a result of getting away from that person. And a similar song that I listened to when I was growing up in sort of the 90s, early 2000s, Dance the Night Away by the Mavericks. Same thing. The lyrics, like the song's really happy. They're all dancing like it's a country song, but it's like kind of got that like Mexican vibe to it. And they're all like, hey, it's all happy and go lucky. But the lyrics are like literally, basically, I got over this breakup and I'm happy. And if she calls, tell her to leave me a hell alone, because I'm really happy right now. And I just like, Jesus, like how many like actually happy songs are there where the lyrics are happy? They probably just don't. I mean, the last one I could think of is probably that really annoying song by what's his name?
By Pharrell.
Yeah.
Or the Despicable Me 2 soundtrack, I think it was.
'Cause I'm happy.
Yeah, that song.
You know what's funny about that is I feel like when he was doing that, he probably was not happy at all. Because he probably had to do that like 50 times to get the video right. And he's like,
right.
I swear, didn't he say somewhere that he actually hated that song now? Or like,
I mean, that's the thing. He's this insanely talented producer and session drummer, and you know, he's got like once I found out that he existed, and like I just started to see him pop up everywhere, like in my history, right? It was like, oh, I didn't know that was him. And it's like, I think it's hilarious that he then, you know, he gets this moment of fame, you know, because he's a working musician who has been around for years and years and years, who is responsible for a lot of hits, but he was never in the public eye. Then he writes this crazy song about, you know, raising the roof and all that stuff, and you know, wears a silly hat, and he's getting an Oscar and doing these silly dances and whatever. And I just think it's hilarious that like that's just how fame works, right? Like you get to make stuff and be in the shadows, but like if you you know, you write a silly song about being happy, like all of a sudden you can be on billboards and stuff like that.
Here's the interesting thing about songwriting as well. It's like many people that I've seen who I was like, oh yeah, whatever happened to them? They made like this sort of go of it like in the 2000s, and then they disappeared. And then I found out, oh, they've gone into producing, and holy shit, they wrote all of these songs. And what's interesting about Pharrell and also Bruno Mars is obviously with Pharrell, he was in NERD, the rap group thing, but he was mostly behind the scenes. And Bruno Mars, same thing. For years, he wrote other people's songs. Like he famously wrote Gnarls Barkley's "Crazy," and I remember one time seeing him on a chat show singing it, and it's like, yeah, actually, it does kind of sound like his kind of a song. And it's interesting what we were talking about with the ego thing earlier. I think a lot of them kind of think like, do you know what? I could easily have a whole career just doing songwriting and never be in the public eye. But what if I just tried my hand at it? You know what I mean? And it's funny because those guys are really like, they've probably quadrupled what they would have ever done just having that kind of a career by making themselves, you know, famous in their own right, like with their own music. And it kind of stuns me that they hadn't done it sooner, particularly Bruno Mars, like with that voice. It's interesting, but it could just be a case of time and like maybe he did try years before, but it just wasn't happening. But go on.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, all I was going to say was that it's funny how many working musicians write other people's songs as well. Like I know Ed Sheeran has written music for like Justin Bieber, for example, and I think Jessie J wrote some music for Miley Cyrus. I mean, the list goes on. Like they write for each other and stuff. And it's, I mean, it's a big industry. There's a lot of money to be made in that industry. But I
mean, I think people, you know, there's this logical fallacy that exists where, you know, someone will appear on, you know, the national or global stage and they'll have this huge hit and people will be like, oh, he's an overnight success. She's an overnight success. And it's like, no, they've been working for 20 years, slogging it away as a songwriter or, you know, as a backup singer or whatever. And the difference maybe is just that they got a connection that didn't exist before. But it also, I think, belies like how much work goes into making that happen. Like there's a music label who's spending, you know, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars on promoting that. You know, like there's a publicist who's like coordinating, you know, a publicity tour. You know, there's all kinds of bookers who are creating, you know, the actual like live music tour. You know, there's merchandise that goes into it. Like there's commercial advertising. Like there, you know, it's an industry. It's one of the biggest industries in the world, right? Like where it's all geared around, like we take a product and we blast it out to the world through all these different channels. And, you know, we as the consumers are kind of like, oh, that person came out of nowhere. No, they didn't come out of nowhere. They came out from a concerted strategy that was, you know, trying to connect them with an audience at a certain time through huge amounts of work.
And another thing that really strengthens that argument as well is like when you see a musician, you know, like particularly when you go, oh, where did they go? They were really big for a while and then they disappeared. Like I know I covered this earlier, but like a good example is Franz Ferdinand from the UK. They were really big in like the mid 2000s. They had that song "Take Me Out." It was featured on in Guitar Hero, I think. So that gave it like more international standing, blah, 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 right? Then they do a follow-up, which I don't think the follow-up had quite as much international buzz, but it did okay in the UK. And then they kind of fizzled out. But they never stopped playing. They never stopped writing. They write music to this day. But like you said, it's that particular strategy. You know, like at that time, they had a bit of an 80s revival going on, at least in the UK. Yeah, and this was everything from the music to the image. And if you look at Franz Ferdinand's image at the time, they had that kind of like emo hair going on, which was very popular at the time. And emo is obviously a revamped version of the New Romantics movement from the 80s. So like nothing just happens by chance. It's all planned. Like I wouldn't even... I reckon there's a good chance that their record label even told them to like get dressed and get haircuts like that. Like, there's a good chance that happened.
That's not a chance. That's a certainty.
Probably,
I years ago, in a different life, you know, knew a band that got signed to a big Christian label, and they were huge in that world. And even they, as soon as they got signed, they got stylists that took them out shopping, got them new haircuts, and, you know, dressed them differently. And they're like, this is how you dress now.
Interesting.
That is everywhere. Like everybody's image is crafted by professionals. And I'm not saying that as a knock, right? I think that's just a business. It's like, when you go to McDonald's, there's a team of people that brought you that hamburger. There's a supply chain behind that put that meat in your face. It's not somebody just flipping a burger in the back and handing it to you. Like, there's a whole process that goes into farming having the cows and like feeding them the right things so that they're plump at the right time or whatever it is. There's a whole chain that gets that to your face, and it's like the same thing with music. There is a whole chain of industry that gets creates that thing before it reaches your ears.
But it's interesting you mentioned that happens in the Christian industry, because I don't know much about Christian music. I know that it's massive in America, because obviously country music is huge in America, like huge. And there's some really good musicians actually. So I've had people cuss me out for liking country music, and you don't know what you're missing. Okay, I
love country.
Yeah, so do I, man. Like Jerry Reed. Have you not heard of Jerry Reed?
I don't know him. No.
Oh my God, you got to check out Jerry Reed. He's like the greatest of all time when it comes to country music. Like, c'est magnifique. But anyway, huge industry, especially in America, and obviously there's a big connection to the Christian demographic in the US, which is huge, and obviously that means there's Christian rock and Christian metal, and that blew my mind, especially when I was growing up as this like metal kid, rock kid. I was like, Christian metal? How does that work? And there's actually a few bands in that industry that actually kind of slap hard, like quite well. But yeah, bringing it back to the point, you said that like the image matters, and I would think, hang on, if this music is about spreading the word of God and spreading happiness and joy and God's word and all this, why the fuck do they care about looks and stuff? Surely that stuff shouldn't matter. You got to tell me more about this, man. What's going on?
It shouldn't, but it does, right? I hate to even talk about it because I'm not in that world anymore. I'm going back. I'm dating myself. But like when I was in that, world, like just as an example, there was a local touring vocal group that came to our church, and that was their whole thing. They had a tour bus. They traveled around to all the different churches. It's a huge industry of you have a built-in audience, and like where secular performers go and show up at different concert venues. Christian bands go around and play at different churches because they don't have to pack the house. It's already there. The audience is built in, and there's work that goes into that or whatever. But this band shows up, vocal group is a better name for them. Every single one of them had, this is going back years, they had like the blonde highlights, like the perfectly crafted, hair that was just so, and like it was 2 guys and 2 women, and they all, were fake blondes, or at least they appeared to be, like their hair was flawless. They had the sequiny shirts and all that stuff that were, shiny and reflective in the lights, and, all of their stage banter patter was like perfectly crafted. It was not extemporaneous at all, and it just I felt like that reaction you just had of like, ugh, like that's how I felt when it was happening. I was doing sound for the church at the time, and I was just like, this is skeezy. I don't like anything about this. And it's all like, it's about an image, right? They get up there and they talk about they'll say things that sound like a sermon, but you can tell that they have written that very carefully over time, and it's gone through the drafting process. It's not coming off the cuff.
Did you ever like see like Christian acts that kind of would like turn up and be like, yeah, we're mega stars, we don't have to talk to you, like we're like, did you get any of that, or is that a bit too far?
I found that they were very personable. I did not get the impression that they were holier than thou, ironically.
Nice.
No, I never had like a negative experience with them, but there was definitely like the level of celebrity, right? Like they were the one band that I'm referring to, like I don't want to name them, but they were very well known in the national market, and they won Dove Awards and all that kind of stuff, which is the Christian Grammy. And they were really nice guys. They were insanely good musicians, but it was hilarious to me that, before they got signed, they were very quirky, and like, they would play like the Knight Rider theme song at their shows. And, they would do like, a whole bunch of 80s songs and stuff like that, and their songs had like a cool edge to them, and I was always like, these guys are more talented than they get credit for. Then they get signed, and all of a sudden, like, their music turned into like 3-chord, you know, very basic, straight ahead songs. And, you know, they were open about it. Like, you know, they had talked to one label, and the label told them, like, you're not right for us right now, but you're close. And then they got to the other label, they did an audition, and the label was like, if you do this, that, and this, you work with our producers, we'll get you there. And that's what they did. They, you know, became a product that was sold on the Christian market. And it's like, I'm not, in no way am I judging them for this. Like, that's just the way it works. You know, it's like finding out how the sausage is made. You know, sometimes is a little bit upsetting, and you never look at the food the same way, but that's just, it's the nature of the business.
This is why I never want to get signed by a label ever. Because if I had someone turn around to me and be like, you have to cut your hair, you have to say this, you have to dress that way, I'd be like, go fuck yourself. I ain't doing that. Jesus.
I don't know. I'd have to see the check first, then I'd think about it.
No, come on, man. You can't sell your soul. You can't sell your soul.
I don't know. I got a mouth to feed. You know, I got a 5-year-old kid. Like,
okay. I'll throw it another way, right? Let's say I'm a record producer, and I say, okay, I'll give you a check for $2 million right now, but I own 100% of your music forever. All future royalties, everything you earn goes to me, including merchandise.
Yeah, no, I think that kind of thing I would probably, now as an older guy, you know, almost 40, like, I think that would hit me differently than it would when I was 25. You know, because I've read about the experiences of people who've gone through that and have been churned out the other side and said it wasn't worth it. Yeah. You know, Billy Corgan from Smashing Pumpkins talks about that a lot. Yeah. Where, like, he was just fed a line of bullshit and told he was amazing and that he was the star of the band. And so he became that asshole. And then, you know, he realized, like, he abandoned his friends and, like, betrayed them and, you know, left them to rot, and the band fell apart as a result of it. And he was like, if I could take that back, I would. And, you know, I just don't think I've seen enough examples where the bands didn't get anything out of it. They end up owing the record label money because they gave up all their publishing, they gave up all their merchandising, and now they've got nothing to show for it. And, you know, Taylor Swift is going through that right now. She's re-recording all of her songs because some jerk owns her catalog, and she can't even, I mean, in no way do I feel bad for Taylor Swift, but just as an example, just as an example that it's not always what it's cracked up to be. And, you know, again, like, I would seriously think about it. You know,
everyone's got a price. Everyone's got a price.
Yeah, I mean, it's that whole chance, right? Like, Rage Against the Machine is like the poster children for anti-establishment, right? But they're on a label, right? They were when they were playing, right? Well, like, they had to make concessions about their music, I'm sure.
The music industry has changed now, though. Like, a lot of musicians I've had on, we've had this debate: would you go independent? Would you go on a label? And I always say the same thing of, like, well, I think it's better to get a distribution deal with a major provider, but still own your music, because any kind of deal where you cut a deal and, you know, even if it's like 60-40 or 70-30, they still own a percentage. You know, that's money going to people who didn't do anything for you. Like, and the thing is, these days we have the power of the internet. You don't need this, like, years ago, to get your name out there, you needed a company to essentially, or the record label to essentially work as like the marketing end and to promote you. But now you don't need that. You can do all of that shit yourself for free. So what can a label really offer you other than mass kind of distribution? That's really the only thing that's worth kind of going for these days. I mean,
I think I'd say the one thing that they could offer you that I as a musician can't provide is skill, right? Like, I am not good at self-promotion. I am terrible at it. And so, like, you know, for so many years, I've been at the same level because, like, I hate talking about myself, right? I hate going on social media and saying, hey, look at this thing I did. You know, I do it because I know I need to in order for someone to hear it. And that's what I want. The ultimate goal is for people to hear the music. But, like, I still am terrible at it, despite having been involved in this business, quote unquote, for, almost 20 years. So it's like, as a great example, we went through one of those companies that licenses your music for film and TV, and they put one of our songs in a Netflix film.
Yeah,
and I was like,
If You Wanna Run, is that correct? In
If You Wanna
2018?
Run, yeah. It was on a movie called The Keeping Hours.
Yes, that's right.
Which is a decent movie. Like, I was actually surprised. I expected it to be a piece of junk, but it was actually pretty good.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a film with Lee Pace, and they play. He's going through a kind of a moment where he's, him and his wife have divorced because their son passed away, and so like he's packing up the house and he's just sitting there drinking a beer, listening to our song, and like that was a holy shit experience, right? But I talked to a couple of friends where they were like, "Oh, did you get some good money out of that?" I was like, "No, I got like a couple tanks of gas out of it, maybe."
Wait, hold on. Do you not get like constant royalties from that song?
Oh, no. So that's the thing, is like the licensing. Yeah, this is a whole thing. We're getting like way far away from. We're talking about industry now, right? The world of licensing is a total. It is meant to put hands on the money of the publishers and not so much the musician, right?
So same as record industry then, basically.
Absolutely. It's
in a nutshell,
taken the place of that, right, in the modern world. So like, the publisher now owns that song in perpetuity. And
damn.
And we got 50% of the payment. The publisher got the other 50%, and then because there's 3 songwriters, I had to split it 3 ways. So it was like maybe a tank and a half of gas for me, and then for the other 2 guys. And like the publisher, if that song were to get picked up by somebody else, they would get equal payment as I would. And it's but
hold on, if it would get picked up though, you'd still get money now. Like, let's say it gets picked up for another movie.
Yeah, okay. If there was another payment put out, I would get 50% of it, I think.
Okay, so you didn't get totally screwed. Like, there's still something there.
I'm not even saying I'm in no way am I saying I'm screwed. I'm just saying it's not like it's a fair deal, because they did the work of going and getting that in a movie that I couldn't do.
Yeah.
But I just am saying it's not what people imagine. Like, oh, I wrote my rent check that month from getting a song on Netflix. No, like it's some money. It's nice to get paid for your work, but it's not, because the music industry has become so flooded with musicians who are able, the democratization of music has made it such that anybody can make the music now, but anybody can make the music now. And so if you walk on a deal, there's 1,000, 1,000,000 people behind you who will happily take that deal and not care about whether they get paid or not.
Yeah, but I feel it's like what we've been saying before. You got to think about the future. Like, things have changed. Do you know what I mean? Like, even for you, you talk about like, okay, if I did a deal with a record label, I could get skill from them. Dude, you'd be better off just employing someone to do your social media marketing for you. That would be better off long term than signing with a record label, because of these bookie percentage deals. Like, I'm a business guy, so when I look at that, I'm like, okay, screwed is a bit of a harsh word, but I always think that the percentage should be in favor of the musician. Right. Do you know what I mean? Even if it's like, I don't know, 55-45, I still think that's better, just because you have that controlling interest, and you can get you can say, oh, I know, actually we want X and X, but if it's like 50-50 or weighted against you, you don't have, it's the same as running a business. You don't have the kind of the say so, or like, you've got other people to answer to. And I just think that's BS when it's your own music, your own product that you've created tirelessly and put effort into, I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm a musician, so I'm like, fight the good fight, screw the man, it's that kind of idea.
I get it, and I've been there, but I'm also like, I try to be a little bit more I don't know, like balanced about it now, where because we went through this, right, where when I had the gigging band, we tried to book a tour. There's all these peripheral companies. In my music blog, I wrote about this. I called them like carpetbaggers, right? It's like once like music became democratized, all these like little extra companies came out of the woodwork that are like, oh, we can help you we'll be your record label for you. Like, you still get to keep everything, but we'll book your tour, or, we'll get you played on regional radio, or, the college circuit. Like, we'll connect you with the companies that book the colleges. Or, one of the other things was like, we'll give you the mailing list of all the venues in your area and the contacts for them. You just have to pay us a fee, and then we'll provide you with the mailing labels, and then you can send your one sheet out to them to get, a gig. So we did pretty much like all of that. And in almost every case, it worked out to nothing, right? It ended up, I wouldn't call it a scam, but it was like definitely a situation that benefited them because they're getting money and we got nothing. So like, the guy that sent us the mailing labels for all the venues, not a single one responded. I think we had over like 200 venues on there. Not a single one responded. Most of them came back as not deliverable, so the labels were probably outdated or incorrect. Then we had another guy who, like, he claimed to be a producer who worked with I'm not going to say the band's name because I don't want to get sued. He worked with some big label bands from the 90s. And he was like, I can take you to the next level or whatever. So we paid him some money because, he kind of wowed us. He took us out to dinner and we were like, oh, this guy's like legit. And, he made a call to a studio for us where we ended up recording an album with them. But like, all he did was call them. We could have called them. But that's literally all the connection he made, was he just said, like, I have this band, they want to record. Are you willing? And they were like, do you have money? And we're like, yeah, we have money. And they're like, well, then you can record here. So, and then he disappeared. So he took our money and ran. Like, he took a large amount of money.
Yeah.
And we felt like fools, right? And we were fools. So it was right for us to feel that way, because like, we should not have given him money until like he actually did something useful for us.
I think it's forgivable though, being young musicians. Like even for
me, I was
like
30 at the time, so I wasn't that young.
Still though, do you know what I mean? Like, how do you know? It's like, life is about making these mistakes and learning from them and stuff. I think it's just, now that we have more information and more access to know how these industries work, we know that there are options. I think that's kind of what I'm alluding to, is that, it's different. Like in the 90s, there wasn't options. Now there's options, and it's like, you don't have to put up with that stuff. I mean, I find it very telling that a lot of major musicians are going back to independent labels. Like Mac DeMarco famously went back to independent label. I think Kanye's trying to get out of his contract and go independent now. Metallica, for example, they made their own record label in like 2015, something like that, because they finally managed to buy their back catalog, and then they naturally re-released all their old music and their new music on that label, because they'd only just been able to buy their masters out. So it's like, I think there's a lot to be said for owning your own music and everything.
Yeah,
but
I mean, I hope that that's always the case, right? I don't ever want to lose control of my stuff,
right.
And if I was capable of doing the promotional work, I think I would be in a much better state, right? Like, the band would be like, but it's, I don't know. I need to, you're right. I need to connect with the people who are good at that. And instead of maybe trying to do it all myself, but the opportunity does exist. I could do it if I was, willing to put in the energy and the time, I guess. But, yeah, in my perfect world, I had always hoped that someone would come along who was like, I recognize the quality of your music, and I would like to now bring what I can to it, which is, the business side of it or whatever. And we had a couple people like that. We went through probably like 6 managers over time who, were people who thought they could take the band to the next level, and they all beat their head against the wall for a few months or longer. And then they were like, oh, this is harder than it looks. So, it's tricky.
Moving it forward, obviously you mentioned earlier that you got a new record coming out. Now, on your website, it states that you're going to release this album, or sort of, it was stated that you were going to release it last year as a follow-up to 2019's Under the Mountain. Now, I think you mentioned a date earlier. I might have got that wrong, but when do you think we can actually expect this next record? And more importantly, what kind of themes do you think it's going to cover lyrically? Like, what's the direction of this new record?
Yeah, so It did get pushed back a little bit. I was hoping to release it in 2020. I was hoping to continue jamming with Dan and Ryan, the guys who worked with me on this one. And but then COVID hit, and that really impacted our schedule. So I'm hoping that it will be done. It's in mastering right now. So
excellent.
Yeah, I'm hoping to get it back in the next week, and then it should be out, I would think, in like a month or so.
What was the name again of the record?
Parasite and Host.
Parasite and Host. Okay.
Yeah. So lyrically, this album it's a whole long story. I'll try to keep it as short as possible. I'm really bad with telling short stories, so I apologize.
Hey, longer the better, man. I love stories.
So when my son was born, his mom went through a real difficult experience. I don't want to go into the details of it, but basically, like, she had a huge, it devastated both of our lives, and we ended up splitting up, right?
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Oh, thank you. But, it's all worked out for the better. She's, met someone else. She's happy. They've had another kid, but, it was a really difficult experience for me, for, a newborn baby, I'm sure, because he ended up being separated from his mom for a time, and like, and certainly for her. So after that experience, it rocked my world, right? I was always like a hesitant parent. I was not. She convinced me to become a parent, and and it was something I was worried about. It was something I was very nervous about. And when he was born, she kept saying, like, no, it's going to be great. Like, everything's going to be fine. Stop worrying. And then when all this went down, and it was like as bad and worse than I had imagined with all of the drama, I was just like devastated. And, my world was pretty much over in my mind, right? Like, I didn't know how to be a parent. I didn't know how to be a single parent, certainly. And, I went through this really dark period where I was just like, this is, it's over. Life is pointless. Like, I'm out. And so, it was really heavy. It was really dark. And I didn't realize at the time, I started making decisions that I didn't care about other people. I didn't care about myself. I didn't care what happened. I didn't care about the consequences. So I just sorry, there's a guy outside working on, so I don't know if you hear some hammering, but I didn't have any care about whether life continued or not. And I made some really dark decisions that hurt a lot of people, right? Like, I was cruel to people. I was uncaring. And I just went around as if I was the only person that mattered, because I thought, like, life is pointless. So why should I bother caring? All of that to say, the songs on Under the Mountain had a lot to do with, like, what brought all this on. Like, is mental health, did this come from me? Is this coming from the people who made me, right? Is this coming from my parents, my grandparents, who all had their own issues with mental health? It's kind of like delving into that darkness with like an empathetic approach. Parasite and Host is like, fuck that. Let's pretend that was the right way to go. Let's pretend that, ruining people's lives was the right choice. It's kind of like it's almost like embracing the dark side and saying, it was fun. Like, the darkness is fun. The darkness is enjoyable. And there were good things that came out of it. And so I kind of, like, whenever I write songs like that, there's this kind of character I've created in my head that, because I'm if I walk into a bar, I am social anxiety through and through, right? Like, I am worried about, what is that person doing? Is that guy going to get in a fight? And, why is the music so loud? And did I just say the wrong thing? I never feel comfortable in social environments. This character in my head is the guy that walks into the bar as like, everyone should be looking at me, right? And so all these songs, where Under the Mountain was all like the self-doubt and the social anxiety and all that, the weaker side of it, but still trying to retain humanity. Parasite and Host is like, fuck it, don't care. I'm the one that matters. Everybody else can, deal. And so it's like it's dark, but it's also more fun because it's like, you know, those people, it's like a straight rock album, and I haven't made one of those for a long time.
Mm.
And you know,
I was
Dan and
going to
Ryan.
say, if I can just interject for one
Yeah,
second,
sure.
one of your, I think the earliest record you did, or one of the early, around sort of 2009 to 2011 time, was very heavy. And it's interesting because if you look at your back catalog, because I actually really liked your music, like I
Oh, thanks.
put it to my Spotify, so I was like, this slaps. But what's interesting is, yeah, that very first record, or one of the earlier ones, is very rock orientated, like quite very heavy. Then the rest of the albums go off on this kind of like acoustic country kind of vibe, I guess. It's probably the best way to sum it up. And then yeah, so we're sort of like full circle coming back to the roots, I guess, and going for something a bit heavier, which is interesting.
Yeah, this one, I tend to go through like, I put stuff in the musical or the creative blender, right? And then you don't know what comes out until like 6 months to a year later, right? There's like a lag time. So I went through a year of just listening to nothing but like blues, rock, like Kenny Wayne Shepherd, Gary Clark Jr., and then like a lot of retro leaning rock. So like the Black Keys or the Amazons, and you know, just kind of like, and then I went a little deeper and just spent a while listening to nothing but like Buddy Holly and Elvis, you know, where I just wanted to get like, what are the root components of rock? Like what makes this, why, like, cause you listen to Jailhouse Rock, right? That song is like, what, I don't know, 70 or 80 years old. That song is still amazing. Yeah. It's not amazing as like a historical piece. It's amazing. Like if that song came out right now, Elvis would be a bona fide star because like his voice in that, like the grit he puts on it, you know, it's insane how captivating it is. And I was like, what is it about this stuff that makes it so damn good? And so like I spent probably like over a year and a half trying to just like delve into that stuff and then see what comes out of it. And you know, Ryan and Dan both have different musical influences, and you know, they brought something new to the table, right? Which is like when we were jamming, we just would like put together a verse and a chorus, and it was like, because the band is there live, you know, there's an energy to that you don't get when you're just with a guitar and your notebook, you know. So I think this one has a lot more up-tempo vibe to it than any of my previous albums. Cool.
Yeah, no, we'll look forward to hearing that. So it's February now. Do you reckon within the next couple of months, or do you have a particular date penned? Okay, so
I hope so. I mean, I don't have a date in mind. It's just as soon as possible, you know, like COVID set everybody back, obviously, but like with this phase, it's always tricky because it's like, you know, once the mastering's done, then, you know, we might have to go back and forth once or twice with the mastering guy. And then it's, you know, you put it on the platforms, and sometimes it's ready in like a week, and sometimes it's ready in like a month. And so you never know. But I'm aiming for early spring at the latest.
Given that your music is available on platforms like Spotify and Apple, is it available on iTunes? Okay.
Yeah, it's any streaming platform. So Amazon, Apple, Spotify, I put it out to everywhere.
Like, obviously you don't have to go into specifics, but like I've heard a lot of stuff in the media about how musicians kind of get screwed over, and you know, you don't really get a lot out of these platforms as far as like money is concerned. Like, how has it been for you? Like, is it worth it? You know, can you kind of make a living off it, or is it just kind of like, you know what, we've got our stuff out there, and that's the most important thing?
Yeah. So this is what I'm really bad at, Christian, is I do not do well with the business, right?
Okay.
And when I was a gigging musician, people would come up to me and be like, "Is your album for sale?" I'd be like, "You know what? Don't even pay me for it. Just take it." You know. And that is the reaction that all the other band members would have when I would
you motherfucker.
They're like, that's gas money for us. Like, what are you doing? And I'm just like, no, I just don't feel right taking money for it. And I don't know what that is. I don't know why I have that inclination, because it's stupid. It's really dumb, right? I get it.
No, I get it. I think it's fair. Like, I remember when I first did my very, very first record, like we did sell it, but I think we did give out a certain amount of copies for free, because you have to, like, you can't charge like you can charge your friends, but there, I know that feeling that you're talking about. It does make you feel a bit uncomfortable initially, but in fairness, if it's a stranger, why shouldn't you charge your money for it? You know, it's your work.
And it's not like I didn't put work, it's years of effort in some cases, right? Like a year or two worth of work. It's every minute I'm not at my job, like, I'm working on this in a lot of ways. And, so it's a dumb thing. I don't know why I do it, but all of that to say, with streaming, no, I don't make any serious. Can you hear that drilling out there?
I can't hear it at all, mate.
Okay. So yeah, whenever with streaming, I don't make a ton of money off of it. It's fractions of a cent per play.
Okay.
So, I think in order to make real money off of streaming, you have to have like millions of downloads, and I'm never going to be in that spot. I don't think so.
So maybe merchandise is the better route then, potentially.
Yeah. We definitely made more money from shirts and stuff like that when we had the live band, but I think it's harder to do that over, like, once the gigging is over. If you're not gigging anymore, then there's like that in the moment feel when you're playing at a bar or a winery or something. People have been drinking and they're like, they want to come up and talk and they want to be friendly, and they're like, yeah, I'll buy a t-shirt or whatever. That connection doesn't exist when you're playing.
You say that, but maybe you should try your hand at online gigging. That's a lot of musicians have been doing, obviously, because they've not been able to sort of perform in normal venues. And the interesting thing I found is that a lot of them are treating it like that busking approach. And I think it's kind of cool, because you have that kind of like live stream element where people can request. So obviously for the fan base for Adams Wilson, people can say, hey, can you play this? And you can be like, yeah, and play it. And so there's that element, and maybe that's a way to make money and stuff. And I think it's certainly worth it. I know time is obviously a tricky one, but the good thing about that is you can choose when you do it. Obviously with the gig, it's always in the evening. You have to wait, not necessarily on last, like,
right.
There's good and bad to it. But, with streaming, it's like you're in control.
Yeah, I may get there. I'm not sure. I think I've toyed with that, with different models of release. Like there's the one album, we called it the Postcards Project, where we spent over a year writing and recording an album or a song every month, and we would make a video for the. I would make a video for the song every month. Boogers didn't help. So, it was like every month putting out a new song and promoting it on social media and stuff like that. And I was like, I feel like this is more connecting than just putting out an album once on streaming and just seeing what happens, right? It was like every month it was a new time to engage with the fans. And it was, it was a fun experiment, but it was also like super time intensive, and it was draining. So I tend to prefer things more like that, where it's ongoing creativity. The performance side of it, for whatever reason, has just never really, I don't have that bug that some musicians have, where they're like, I can't wait to play live and I can't wait to get this in front of people. I'm like, I'd rather just hand them an album, right? Like, I'd rather them listen to it in their own time, when they're comfortable, like when they're driving. I think I just get so nervous about, I get caught up in my own head when I'm performing. I don't have that thing. I just watched a concert of Jeff Buckley from, the 90s, obviously. And I was amazed. Like, he seemed like he was lost, right?
Yeah.
Like, he's caught up in it. And, he's like being a little bit extemporaneous. Like, some of his riffs, it seemed like he was toying with them a little bit. They're sort of jamming. And I was just like, I never got there. I never got to that place where I could just let go. And maybe it was an act, maybe he was like in his head thinking like, oh, I need to go to a 6th tier, he's like, all the calculations were in the front of his mind, and he just makes it appear as though he's lost in the music. But, I have known musicians who can, they can drink or they can smoke up or whatever, and they'll just get lost in the music and really let go. I was never able to do that. And I think, playing live on the internet would also, I think, bring me back to that space. So I don't know if that's the right
Hey,
venue for me.
fair play, man. There are musicians that do it. I think Gorillaz is a good example of that. You know, they have performed live, but they have sort of said that it's like really expensive to set up the whole, you know, animated thing. And, you know, I think it's fair. Like, I'm the same. I prefer writing music to playing it. Like, playing is fun, but yeah, I don't. I have had those moments here and there where it's been like a really good vibe, and I think I would still do it, but I don't think I would do it to the extent that other people do it. I would do it like sparingly, you know, like here and there. And I don't feel that rush that other people feel. But there is a rush from creating music, and I guess it's just different, isn't it? Everyone has their different likes and dislikes.
I just feel like it's more it's more tangible. It's more rewarding when you work on a song, and at the end of it, you have a thing. I mean, you can't hold it in your hands anymore, but you can listen to it, right? It's there. It exists. And it's a time capsule. You can look back on it and say, like, that's what I sounded like at the time. And like, I remember working with Ryan and Dan, and like, you know, we had that like back and forth, you know, when we were jamming in the basement or whatever. When you're playing live, it's ephemeral, right? Like once you're done playing, it's over. And you can have the memory of it, but like so much of that memory is colored by your more modern experience, right? Like things that have happened since then. And so it's like, I view memory as we could go on for an hour probably on my feelings on memory, but I think like, you know, memory in most cases is misleading, right? Like say we had a show and I was really worried about, you know, the booking manager didn't get back to me until like the day before. We didn't have a chance to promote it enough. And like, you know, the person that I was really hoping, you know, to show up didn't show up, or, you know, and like my anxiety about that would color my memory. Like, whereas a person in the audience was like, that was a great show. Like you seemed like you were really, and I had this experience over and over and over again. I would be caught up in the details of like, oh, that show went terrible because XYZ. And then I would talk to an audience member. They're like, that was one of my favorite shows of yours. You seemed like you were so lost in the music. I'm like, that is a lie. You are completely misled. But I mean, that's great, right? It's everybody takes away from it their own version of it. But I feel like with an album, it's a record. It's cut in stone. You can't go back. You can't change it. It's there. I mean, you have a different approach to it over time, right? Like maybe new things have come into your experience and you see it differently.
No.
There.
You're onto something there. I think you're right, actually. Our feelings about certain memories change because our perception of life changes. So in that moment, it felt a certain way, but we reflect on it differently later. But yeah, I suppose if you remember how something made you feel, which is generally what humans do, you know, you forget what people say and such. I think that's kind of the element behind it, isn't it? Like for instance, when I think back to like an ex-girlfriend or something, and I'm like, oh yeah, the good times. It's like, yeah, but what about the bad times? Remember how that made you feel? And it's like, oh yeah, oh no, it wasn't all like, because it's that rose-tinted glasses effect, isn't it? Yeah.
I've delved into this a little bit with like, you know, reading some papers or, you know, listening to podcasts or whatever, and more and more I've learned that the brain is a committee. It is not a single unified whole, right, that we imagine it as. And so like when you recall a memory, it goes through your creative portion of your brain. It goes through your emotional state. It goes through your trauma state, right? And so like it colors the memory where you think, you know, like if your present experience is like right now I'm in a fear state, I might remember a certain thing, an event from the past in a negative way, even though maybe 2 days ago when I was in a happy state, you know, I was drinking, I'm hanging out with my buddies, and I'm like, yeah, remember that time we did that thing? And I'm like, it's in a positive light because I'm now in a positive light. We're like, and I'm not a scientist, right? I've done a little bit of reading, and, you know, I'm not claiming to be an authority on this, but it's been, what I have discovered has been accurate to my anecdotal experience. And I feel like, you know, this is so crucial in songwriting too, right? It affects, like, when you stop and think about how these things work, it factors into the way that you create, because you're like, you know, you can channel that more by setting up the circumstances for it, right? Like I can put myself into a negative headspace, or maybe I could try and steer it away from being quite so negative by trying to think about, you know, a time that I was happy, whatever. You know, there's different ways you can toy with it. And I think live music is just another example of that, where it's like whatever headspace you're in at the time versus the headspace you're in now that you're recalling it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'll add to that as well, something that you touched on, that like another person's perception of the same memory is key in that. Like I remember reminiscing with an old friend about something, and they said, "Oh, that's not quite how I remember it." And it's interesting, you know, because that obviously the perception of the memory is equally as important as the details. Because particularly like if we take like let's take like a workplace scenario where you see things that went down in a certain way and another person has a completely different understanding of the situation, and technically you could argue both people's perceptions are correct because it's their own individual perception of that event, and you know, it's not to say that it's wrong, but like sometimes that can kind of stray away from the details, that we often forget about the details because we're so caught up in the emotion of the event and the feeling, like you said. So it's an interesting thing to think about for sure.
I mean, you know, this has come up a lot with mental health, because they talk about it. You know, I'm someone who's struggled with depression for most of my life, and you know, they talk about when a symptom of depression is that it colors your life experiences and your memories, and you begin to think, I've always felt this way, even though objectively you can come up with examples or proof that that is not true. But your brain, it's almost like a poison, where it's like once it's in there, it seeps into all of the other aspects of your brain and says, hey, you've always been a miserable asshole, and that's never going to change, right? It affects your past, your present, and your future. And that, for me at least, has been so true. Like there are times when, you know, you talk to a loved one and they're like, you weren't unhappy then, you were thrilled with life, you know, you were so happy about, you know, getting married, or you know, about what the band was doing, or this or that or the other thing. And then your brain is like, no, we've always been miserable and we always will be. And so the same thing happens with the audience, right? Where, you know, so many examples I could point to where somebody is like, I thought this, you know, this song is about X thing, right? X whatever imagined scenario in their head. And they would come up to me and be like, you know, hey, this is what that song's about, right? And I'm like, that song, I made that up. It has nothing to do with that. Like, they're like, this was from your life experience when you were going through that breakup, right? I'm like, no, I totally pulled it out of thin air. It has no bearing on my real life whatsoever. But to them, that's what it was about. And I'm like, that's, you know, art is relative, right? Like what it means to me is not what it's going to mean to you. And you take from it whatever you want. And that's totally legit. That's what it's for. It's, you know, once I put it out into the world, I've done what I can do with it. And now it's up to the person who's viewing it or listening to it to define their own experience. And I have no control over that. I want to sometimes. I really wish I could say, no, it's not, you know, the thing that you imagine it's about. But, you know, I have to kind of let go, right? There's a separation that happens once it exists in the world. It's now up to the audience to decide.
So what are you doing for a living then? Like, how are you sort of keeping things going?
I work for a literacy curriculum company. So they make, it has nothing to do with music, but it does have a lot to do with creativity, right? Like, so I manage a team of audio visual, like people who make websites, people who make videos.
Okay.
And, you know, like I'm sort of, you know, I'm like a manager of that team, director, whatever you want to call it, where, you know, they create stuff and I, you know, support them in that. And sometimes I get to jump in and help making the actual thing when we're when we're busy. But for the most part, it's kind of a managerial role.
Cool. If you had to sum up your music career with one sentence, what would it be?
Christian, you can see from our discussion so far, I'm not good at one sentence answers. if I could sum up my music career in one sentence, I'd say something along the lines of, it's honest, and it's about the challenges that I have faced personally, and it's heavy, like I've never been able to make light music, and it's always going to be honest. It's always going to be heavy. And I don't mean heavy like, guitar is heavy. I mean, like, it's going to be dark. It's going to be moody, but it's going to be real.
I said a sentence, not several paragraphs. Jesus.
I'm sorry. I tried. I can't do it.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
What's the biggest life lesson you've learned so far?
This I can do in one sentence, I think. There's a quote: "Be kind to everyone you meet, for everyone is facing a great battle." And I'm butchering it probably, but that I might get a tattoo of that, because it's so true, right? Like, I have an internal battle. I have external battles. Like, I've been slogging through stuff. Everyone does. Everyone has that major conflict in their life. And like, people still manage to function despite that. And it's amazing to me. Like, people go on despite, losing their loved ones, or, getting fired, or, their child hates them, or whatever, like all these huge things that have devastated them or changed the course of their life forever. And they still manage to be human. And that blows me away. It's inspiring.
One thing I'll add to that as well is that, like, years ago, I used to be very selfish and sort of like angry at the world, like, well, everyone has this. Why don't I have this? Fuck everyone, fuck everything. Mm-hmm. And certain things have happened throughout the years, difficult times, difficult moments, seeing friends die, stuff like that. I think that kind of begins to shape your perspective of things and makes you kind of think, you know what, this is actually what's important in life. Mm-hmm. And when you start to gain that sense of perspective, that's kind of what I'm alluding to. I think that changes everything. And what I really want to add to what you were saying is that if you have the capability to be nice to people and sort of spread joy and kindness in the world when your life is not kind of full of that, and your life is hard and things aren't going your way, and so on and so forth, then you're beginning to get to that level where you need to be. Because people often talk about like the human spirit, and I think a lot of people in the world are missing that. They don't know what that means. And what it really means is, like, sometimes you watch those movies and, like, it's giving you that like smarmy message and like someone's there for someone else. But that's the reality. Like, I think often in life is like a movie, and you see those surreal, beautiful moments, the birth of a child, someone helping a homeless person. Like I see a lot of stuff when I do my volunteering work, and I get that feeling afterwards. Like, I sit back and I reflect on it, and I'm like, wow, like that was pretty moving, and it's that stuff. It's indescribable, but I think that you're right. If we can somehow just keep being nice to each other, keep spreading that kindness, then we're headed in the right direction, I think. So yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. Absolutely. As we draw things to a close today, do you have any sort of final thoughts that you'd like to share with us, or maybe an upcoming project that you'd like to share with us? Just an update.
I mean, the music is the biggest thing for me right now. The album Parasite and Host should be out in a couple months, and like, it's, it represents the input from me, but also from Dan Illy and Ryan Busby, who are the other two guys who are just so critical in making it happen. And there's some weird voodoo that happens when creative people get together and, a new thing is made. I have a kid, but I also feel like every album is a kid in its own way. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's a thing that you were so focused on at the time for, you spend years of your life trying to make this thing happen, and then it does. And I feel like some guy from the 1930s. I've got like 10 or 11 kids out there right now, and they're all living their own little life, and they mean things to other people. And
yeah.
So I always, if I could ask anybody to go back and listen to other albums and stuff like that, I think that would be my other big thing is like, yeah, I'm working on this new thing, but I've also got, a pretty large back catalog that still means a lot to me, and I hope means something to other people.
Absolutely, and I would second that. I think you've got a fantastic back catalogue. I was really sort of surprised that it hasn't got more sort of recognition, because it's genuinely good music, and I'm not just saying that because he's my guest. Like, I mean it. Like, it's I don't often add people's music to my Spotify unless it's like I really like it and I want to hear it regularly. And when I heard Adam's music, I was like, this is good stuff. So yeah.
Thank you.
No worries, man. For everyone listening to the podcast, like, make sure you go and check out his music, buy it if you can, and support Adams. Massive thank you for appearing on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you and talking to you. So thank you.
Christian, this has been hugely entertaining for me. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate you making the time to do this. And, you seem like an awesome person. So thanks for being you, man.
Likewise, man. It's been a pleasure. To everyone listening to the Christian Reeve podcast, whether you're listening on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, let me know. Tweet at me. Let me know where you're listening, because it'd be good to know. And you guys, I see you guys listening, but I don't see you guys talking. So let me know. I want to know. And as always, if there's a particular topic or a particular guest that you would like to see on the show in the future, please let me know. My DMs are open. Thank you for listening. Peace out. One love. I'll see you in the next one.